everybody. Welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces Talks Music. So today we are talking about the album The Modern Lovers by the band The Modern Lovers. The album originally came out in 1976, but all of the tracks were recorded between 71 and 72. The band only existed, this lineup of the band, only existed from 70 to 74. So the lineup of this original incarnation of the Modern Lovers was Jonathan Richman as singer-songwriter and guitarist. Jerry Harrison was on keyboards, who later went on to join the Talking Heads. And we talked about that in the Talking Heads video. Ernie Brooks is on bass, and David Robinson is on drums. And David Robinson, of course, went on to co-found the Cars, which is another incredible band that we'll have to talk about soon on the channel. So this album has kind of an interesting story because it wasn't released until 76, even though they broke up 2 years earlier. The band was immensely popular in Massachusetts, where Jonathan Richman was from. And as they played live between 70 and 74, they started getting offers for recording contracts. So they'd go into the studio and try to create these demos, but for one reason or another, the demos just weren't working out. They had to keep going in and making more demos. Also, of course, another record company would come in, somebody like A&M or somebody would come in, and then they'd want them to make demos. So they were making all of these recordings, some of them, in fact, in New York with John Kell producing. And when the dust finally settled and they decided that they wanted to go ahead and make an album with John Kell producing, Jonathan had decided that he had changed a lot as a person and that he didn't want to keep doing the music that they were doing. He had a whole other thing in mind that he wanted to start doing. So it was very difficult to try to talk him into playing the old songs at all. And there are lots of other circumstances around all of this, of course. A good friend of a couple of the band members passed away right at this time, so they had a really, really hard time getting any kind of decent recordings from the band. So eventually, the record company they signed with just ended up dropping them, and they never made that album. So later, in 76, Jonathan was, of course, still making music. He had a whole new band, a whole other lineup, and it was called Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers. But one of his producer friends started scraping together these old recordings and ended up releasing The Modern Lovers, that album. And of course, it did incredibly well. Critics adore the album, and it's been cited as one of the most influential albums of all time. David Bowie covered Pablo Picasso, the Sex Pistols covered Roadrunner, along with a ton of other bands doing covers of them. And you can hear their sound echoed through a lot of new wave, a lot of punk, a lot of post-punk. Personally, for me, the thing I hear the most is probably the Violent Femmes. I feel like they're very, very similar, and maybe a little bit of Devo as well. And I don't mean that the Violent Femmes sound exactly like the Modern Lovers, or that Devo sounds anything remotely like the Modern Lovers. The Modern Lovers actually are very, very influenced by the Velvet Underground. And they sound a lot like the Velvet Underground. But the main difference, I think, is Jonathan Richman is really, really young at this time. He's a teenager. And his attitude toward life and the things that he sings about, those kinds of things, I think are really what remind me of the Violent Femmes and Devo, because they were also really, really young when they started. So you get a lot of just teen angst. And I don't mean it's like angry, aggressive music. It's not that at all. It's very heightened passion, very romantic, singing about how bad they want to be in love and how bad they want to have sex and things that young people, of course, would think about. But I do believe as you get older and you get a little more in control of yourself and a little bit more in control of life, you begin to realize that you're in control of those kinds of things, And I believe that that's probably what caused Jonathan Richman to make such a hard shift from the music they were making in 73 to the music that he was making in 76. I feel like he may have been kind of embarrassed about that stuff. And he doesn't consider The Modern Lovers, that album, to be his first album. His first album, he believes, is the '76 release, Jonathan Richman and The Modern Lovers. And you can hear it in the music. I mean, it's weird to listen to a teenager complain, you know? It's a very strange thing. But at the same time, it has this weird quirkiness and this charm. And I feel like, of course, we understand it because we went through it. You know, I do not believe that people should just pack away their past and try to ignore that anything ever happened, because I feel like we learn by the mistakes that we made. It's the only way that we can grow. So this album's like this weird little time capsule of someone who is growing up, who literally in this time is growing up to the point that as soon as they cross that line, they just want to move on. They're ready to just do what's next in life for them and move away from the way that they were into what they're becoming, which is a pretty incredible thing. And I appreciate that it's captured in this album, that we get to hear the way this person used to be. And you can go to, you know, the '76 release and listen to the kind of stuff that he really wanted to be doing. And there's nothing wrong with that stuff, but I don't believe that it's as important musically as that first album. That first album is so influential for what the late '70s and the '80s would become. And it's weird because it is so much just the Velvet Underground. Like the Velvet Underground is a bigger influence, I feel like, on that stuff. But adding the fact that he's a teenager and is not ashamed of that fact, is not trying to be a rock star or be an adult. He's just being himself, his weird little teenager self, you know. When you put those two things together, I feel like there is a whole subgenre of new wave that is just, mostly the Violent Femmes, of course, that is just modeled after that. It's insane. So this is an incredibly strange, incredibly wonderful album. If you like the Velvet Underground and you can handle it being a little more childish, this is right up your alley. It's incredible. It truly is incredible. If you love the Violent Femmes, I believe you'll be able to find a way into this and enjoy this just as much. Even though the music's a little bit different because it's more like the Velvet Underground, of course. All right, so let's talk about the album itself just a tiny bit. So the original release had 9 tunes on it. It's got Roadrunner, Astral Plane, Old World, Pablo Picasso, She Cracked, Hospital, Someone I Care About, Girlfriend, and Modern World. And then in 1986, Rhino reissued the album with 3 extra tracks on it. It had I'm Straight, Dignified and Old, and Government Center added to it. And then in 2003, Castle reissued it with a bunch of bonus tracks. It's got Dignified and Old, I'm Straight, Government Center, I Want to Sleep in Your Arms, Dance With Me, Someone I Care About, Modern World, and an alternate version of Roadrunner. So Roadrunner is probably their most famous song. It is not my favorite song on the album. I generally gravitate towards the stranger stuff. I'm a huge fan of Pablo Picasso and a huge fan of I'm Straight. Those 2 tunes I think are really about the best thing this band has put out. Pablo Picasso is in Repo Man, but it's not the Modern Lovers. You need to get the Modern Lovers version of it. Whenever Chris hears the tune I'm Straight, he always says it makes him think about the band Ween, because they do a lot of stuff like that, things like The Stallion Part 1 and all of that. And I see that as well, of course. I mean, it's really young. You know, it's very childish and it's very interesting and bizarre. It's just really good music and absolutely worth picking up. But if you do grab it, make sure to grab one of the later releases, one of the reissues, so you can get all those extra tracks. It's absolutely worth it. All right, well, thank you so much for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit the like button and make sure to subscribe because we have so much more stuff like this, and have a great day.